Welcome back, Weebles and Weeboos, and Happy New Year! As you can see, Undertale's, of course, not Undertale, Undercards has received its monthly update, and yeah, we actually have some new cards. Now, to be fair, we technically, excluding the tokens, don't have many, but the ones that we have are very, very interesting. And we didn't just get new cards, we got quite a significant bit of reworking that I'm very happy about. We'll get to that later. I'm gonna ignore all the tokens until they become relevant. So first of all, we have Jester, a 6-cost legendary that's a 5/7, which has delay if you spend 4 or more gold on spells last turn, add a Devil's Tail to your hand, and add the freedom artifact. Now, let me just double check. Delay is at the end of turn. I just wanted to double check that when it says last turn, it doesn't mean the turn that you played it, because by the time the delay triggered, that would be the last turn. I didn't think that was the case, but I just wanted to double check it wasn't. So, I'm not gonna lie, I don't have a lot of hope for this card, but let's actually go over what these things do. The Devil's Tail is a new 0-cost token spell, which also has delay if you spent 4 or more gold on spells last turn. And what it does is it just draws another card in place of itself and adds itself back to your deck. But if you didn't spend 4 or more gold on spells to cast that turn, then it will disable the Freedom Artifact. So what's the Freedom Artifact? Whenever an allied Devil's Tail is played, the counter of the Freedom Artifact gets increased by 1. And when it's disabled, it removes all counters from the artifact and adds a random Chaos weapon to your deck for every counter removed. If you don't remember what the Chaos weapons are, they're the different things that you can choose to cast when you play the normal general legendary. They are Club Chaos. For 5, you can cast 7 random spells costing less than or equal to 4 gold on random targets. The Devil's Knife, which will instantly kill a random enemy monster, which, if you're newer to Undercards, that's actually better than it sounds, because even though the target is random, because there's only 4 slots on the board to fit monsters anyway, and obviously also just because you get to attack before you cast this a lot of the time, it's not that hard to make it so there's only one big monster that this can target on the board and then use this to kill it. And since it can't target your own, it's not too hard to set up situations where, even though this does target a random enemy monster, there's only one enemy monster, so it will always hit the same thing. And being able to do that for 5 is a really good deal if you can set that up. Diamond Chaos will draw 3 cards and reduce the cost of all of them by 2 for 5, which is absolutely crazy powerful. The main problem is just getting enough hand space and gold to be able to use all of this. Heart Chaos, which restores 7 health to all allies, which may seem like the weakest one, and it might be, but it's more useful than you'd expect just because burn is especially prevalent in Undercards, being a game where you can save your money in between turns. And Spade Chaos, which deals damage equal to all enemies, equal to the amount of empty slots on your side of the board, which I don't see people use much, but to be honest, this is probably my most used Chaos weapon, except maybe the Devil's Knife. You see, the thing with Spade Chaos is that obviously it's both a board clear that can save your life, but sometimes it's also the reach to end a game because it does damage the enemy themselves as well. And even when you have to play it with the normal Devil, which means the maximum damage you can get off of this is 3, it's still well worthwhile. So being able to get this as a separate card and play it with a fully empty board so you can get the maximum 4 damage, I think is well worth it. So yeah, all the Chaos spells are definitely above average cards, so you definitely see the reward in this. The idea is that you'll keep spending 4 or more golden spells every turn and keep playing Devil's Tails to big up your Freedom Artifact until finally you're like, okay, that's enough for Chaos weapons. You play a Devil's Tail having not spent enough money on casting spells, and that will disable the Freedom Artifact but then give you a Chaos weapon for every single time you play Devil's Tail before you broke the kind of combo. I'm not gonna lie, okay, I'll say this, I love the design of this card, I think it's gonna be a very fun card, but I don't have much hope for it to be good, because first of all, although I do think Chaos weapons are of course good, I don't think most Chaos weapons are that much better than the average card. They are better, definitely, but I think that they aren't good enough to be a solo win condition. You're not running a Caged Jester deck where it's like the way you plan to win, I don't think. I don't think Chaos spells will be able to do that for you. They certainly give you a nice advantage, but I don't think they can be a win condition in their own right. Again, the only option for burst damage you have is Spade Chaos, and that's probably the easiest way you could make it a win condition. And obviously Spade Chaos is made more for board clear than face damage. And besides that, you've more got tools to stay alive than tools to actually win the game. There's the problem of even setting this up in the first place. Now, at the very least, they were correcting, making sure this thing had a pretty good stat line for 6, so that it's not going to be useless even if you don't manage to get the effect to do much. But my main problem with this is you have to spend 4 or more gold on spells the turn before you play this, so you won't even know yet if you want to play this the next turn, and you'll have to spend that much money on spells to be able to do it. And if you don't do that in advance, then you're going to have to delay playing this for a turn, which is going to shoot you in the foot. And that also kind of invalidates the decent stats of this a little bit, because you're not going to be playing this on curve, because the turn before you play it you have to spend 4 or more gold on spells, so that means you're playing this off curve, so yeah, that's pretty bad to start. But then you have to continuously keep spending 4 or more gold on spells the turn before you play Devil's Tail, when you don't know when you're going to draw it, and you're going to delay it even more if you don't do it in preparation for that turn. And that's only to get the counter up. Then as well as that, once you get the counter to as high as you'd like it, you then have to get the Devil's Tail again, cast it again, wait another turn, and then you get the effect. Only then it shuffles the Chaos Weapons into your deck, and now you have to find the Chaos Weapons in your deck as well. It just feels like, yes, this does pay off, but it's a payoff that doesn't solo win the game, and it's also a payoff that takes ages and so much work. It's already awkward enough trying to use, if you spent gold on spells last turn cards, like any amount of gold, more than a couple times. Trying to use one that asks you to continuously do this over and over and over. And on top of that, it's not even just, oh, any amount of gold. Every single time you have to spend at least 4 gold. That is very demanding. I feel like you really won't be able to charge this thing up. I think it really needs a buff. I mean, again, it's just been made, so it could. I haven't even played with it yet, so I guess I shouldn't really be saying anything. But that's my initial impression. I shouldn't have said that like that. That's my impression, is that it will need a buff. I might be completely wrong. Again, I haven't played with it yet. I love the design of this card, though. As I say, I think this is going to be very fun to play around with. I hope it becomes good, because if this does become a good card, then as I say, I expect it'll be really fun and will really spice up some games. But the way it is right now, honestly, why not just run Cage Kings? Because the main problem with this is super highly committal, which and doesn't provide that much reward for it, and the reward is super delayed and a massive deck build around to achieve. Whereas if you run Cage Kings, you just have to run some spells. You don't even have to spend that much money on them. You just have to run some spells, and then you only have to find the Cage Key in your deck. Sorry, not the Cage Key, the Broken Key. The broken key in your deck, and then find the cell key that it shuffles into your deck. So yeah, it still takes a bit, but you're only finding a card in your deck once or twice with Cage Kings before you get your reward, and you only have to cast 1 spell. And what do you get? You get a 5-cost 6/6 that casts a chaos weapon. Sorry, adds a chaos weapon to your hand. And if I remember right, it's of your choice as well, with its cost reduced as well. So I honestly genuinely believe the reward of Caged Kings is comparable to the average reward of Caged Jester. And Caged Jester, like, it's so much more work to get that reward. So I feel like Caged Kings is just better than this, which is kind of a bad sign since Caged Kings is a bit memey. Although I suppose as far as memes go, they're not really that bad. So yeah, sad to say that I don't have much faith in this card, but I do think it's going to be very fun. I definitely will try it. I'll give it a shot. The main thing I'm just worried about, like, I think it's bad enough that it doesn't win the game on its own. It's not a good win condition in its own right, but what makes it especially bad, I think, is that would be fine if you could just put it into a deck alongside other cards that could win you the game, like Soulless Kris and all that. The main problem here is this takes up so much deck space as well, because you're going to have to run so many spells to be able to constantly activate this effect, and you're probably also going to have to run tutors to be able to pull the cards out of your deck, because there's so much shuffling into the deck and waiting to draw another thing with this card. So I feel like when you do build a deck with this card, there's going to be loads of cards in the deck dedicated solely to making this thing work, and not much room to put much else in. So yeah. Anyway, moving on to the next card, we got Royal Papyrus, who is a 10-cost 6/9, who has Taunt and Haste. I'm not sure if this is from anything official, because I sure don't recognise this, but look cool, I guess. When you play him, he gives taunt to all ally monsters with a base cost of 9 or more gold, wherever they are, and haste to the ones in hand. So this probably seems a bit weird at first. First of all, because of the fact it says wherever they are. I don't actually know if this has been used yet in Undercards. I've seen other card games use this terminology for cards multiple times before, so I'm struggling to remember if it's ever has been said in Undercards or if I only remember it in other games. But generally when it would say wherever they are would be that it doesn't matter whether they're in hand, deck, in the graveyard, on the board, they get the buff. The only exception may be if the card didn't even exist at the time you played this, and then you get it from like a get a random card thing after having played it. It might not work in that context. Most card games, when they say wherever they are, it doesn't apply to things like that. I'm not sure if that will be the case here, because again I haven't played with this card yet. So, is this card bad? Because I imagine that's what most people's first impression would be, considering it's just a 10-drop with taunt and haste that gives other things taunt and some of them haste, and only if they're super expensive. Now that does sound really bad, and also, actually before I continue, I think the way this is worded, the taunt and the haste will stack the things in hand. When I first read this I thought it would give haste instead of taunt to the things in hand, but I think actually the things in hand would get both the taunt and the haste the way this is written. But anyway, this seems really bad, but I think I know why they made this card, and it might be enough to make it decent. I think they made this card because they were realizing the issue with the more expensive cards in this game and how polarizing they could be. Because, you see, one of the biggest problems in, well, actually quite a lot of card games where you have attacker's advantage, as in whoever's attacking is the one who chooses which things hit where, because there are other card games where defenders get to choose where attacks go, like for example Eternal, the card game I used to play the most until recently. That card game, essentially you say which units you want to attack, but then you can't actually choose what they attack into. It then goes back over to the opponent, and the opponent says, right, you want to attack with that, well now they have to fight this, and all of that. In defender's advantage games, this isn't as much of a problem, but in games with attacker's advantage, where obviously whoever's attacking chooses where every unit attacks, if you have big, expensive cards that have big effects, but they don't instantly do something, like the effect is really powerful, but it doesn't instantly have its like benefit, and it's a really big, expensive card, you get this really big problem where you spend all this time saving up money to play it, you slam it down. You think, wow, okay, right, I've won the game now, I've got such a crazy amount of value from that. And then your opponent just ignores it and smacks you in the face until you die. Because the thing doesn't have taunt, or it doesn't have haste, it doesn't have any instant way to deal with anything on the board, and the opponent's like, oh, so you're about to get loads of value and, like, beat me in the late game, well, I'll just ignore what you've just played and just hit you in the face until you die. You don't have any money to protect yourself because you just spent it all. So yeah, I think you know what I'm getting at. These kind of cards do terribly unless you can give them a way to instantly protect you the moment they're played, or instantly kill enemy monsters that might give the opponent lethal the second they're played. And Taunt and Haste cover both of those things. So although this card on its own seems really bad, what it will do is, if you have a deck with multiple cards that are like that technically are super powerful and well worth running, but the main problem is just that when you play them, you just die the turn you play them a lot, because you don't have anything to protect yourself with for that turn, and you've just spent all your money, so you can't really save yourself if you get in a sketchy situation afterwards. Being able to give all of them Taunt, and some of them Haste even, will obviously make it so you're much less at risk at dying the turn you play these big game-turning cards, so that, you know, you have a chance. So yeah, this card, I think it's going to have its uses. I think my initial impression, just looking at it straight away, was this looked garbage. Now I'm thinking, okay, you know what, I think it's going to be niche. I think it's not going to see many decks where it's going to be that useful, but I think when it does find a use, we'll be surprised how useful it is. I would like to say as well, I very much am a fan of cards that buff everything in, like, wherever it is. or anything that buffs everything in your deck or everything in your dust pile, stuff like that. I'm a big fan of those kind of cards, so I like the design of this card, although I'm a little bit disappointed all it gives is taunt to most things and haste to some things. But again, I can kind of get that. I see how in Undercards maybe a straight up stat boost to everything in your deck might be overpowered. I mean, Shorm is one of the most powerful effects in the game, despite the fact that he's got such a massive restriction on it with the fact that you need to have a deck of only 3 cards left. But that brings us to the elephant in the room over here I've been pretending doesn't exist. Spamton NEO. Yeah, this is kind of what I was expecting when the update first came out as the Determination card. So, yeah, it's not too surprising that he did end up getting added as a Determination card. I'm very interested to see how good this will be. The Spamton NEO is a 10 cost 1/13 that gives your opponent free chrome. This is an artifact which adds an irresistible deal to your hand. If your hand is full, it shuffles the rightmost card in your hand into your deck first. If you have one already, cast a big shot. If this has 3 counters, disable this. So I just want to clarify, again, this is you giving this to your opponent against their will. And this is talking about what it will do to your opponent. So the irresistible deals, as you can imagine, are these token cards. I have mixed feelings on these. So the irresistible deals are all bad cards to play, but the opponent kind of has to play them because Big Shot is what gets played if they have one in their hand at the start of their turn. As in, if they have an irresistible deal that they didn't play for a turn, or didn't burn in their hand somehow, or discard or something, then yeah, it casts Big Shot, which will deal 99 damage to every single ally monster the opponent has, and their face, and it will do it 99 times. I was thinking there might have been some way to cheese this using Frisk, but now I think about it, I don't think there is. You see, my plan was, use Frisk to make yourself invincible, and then use Pi to make Frisk invincible for the turn, so that even though it does 99 damage to all allies 99 times, the damage wouldn't kill Frisk, because Frisk is invincible for the turn, and and as well as that, it wouldn't kill you, because obviously you're invincible because of Frisk. I thought that was how it was going to pan out, but first of all, this is a turn start effect, which means that if you made Frisk invincible for the turn before, it would wear off by the time the effect triggered, and as well as that, by the next turn, obviously you'd be dead before you could play it again to reapply the buff. But even if that was the case, I remembered that the invincible for this turn effect on Pi was changed a while ago, and now it just gives dodge, so it wouldn't have even worked. I don't know if there is another invincible for this turn effect in the game, but again, if it works the same way as Pi, or it's just for the turn, and it's only when you play it, then again, because it's its turn start, there's still no way you can cheese it. So I'm pretty sure this is literally just death. I think there is no way that you can survive Big Shot, as far as I'm aware. They have to play every irresistible deal they get, or they have to find a way to discard it, or burn it, or something like that. Now, the main problem I see is that they get to choose the bargain to cast, and I think that might be an issue, the fact the opponent can choose which downside they get, because I feel like some of these downsides are not as good as the others. Like Generosity over here, this one is amazing for you. It makes the opponent lose 6 gold and you gain 6 gold. I know it's, again, that's the opposite of what it says here, but this is from the enemy's perspective. I know it's a bit confusing. So, yeah, essentially getting a 12 gold advantage on your opponent, amazing. Yes, they can pick this when, you know, they have 0 gold in the first place, so they don't lose any, but even if they do that, I mean, like, that's still you gaining 6 gold for free. Like, this happens every turn as well. If Generosity was one they were forced to use all the time, that would be amazing. But, again, the opponent gets to choose which downside they get, and this is where it gets a bit awkward. Click here to die, deal 6 damage to the highest HP ally monster, and damage not dealt is dealt to you. Now, this one is still pretty good, because essentially, if the opponent tries to use this when there are no monsters, they're just going to take 6 damage to their face, and eventually it will kill them. And if the opponent tries to use it when they do have monsters, obviously those monsters are going to die. The problem is that there definitely could be decks that go out of their way to abuse this, using stuff like self-healing monsters to, you know, completely ignore this downside. But to be fair, they would have to have a lot of health in the first place to survive the initial hit to heal. So, you know, that is a bit of a stretch. This is, again, though, still one of the better ones for you. F1 for help gives the opponent plus 8 HP. This one might sound really good, and it will be in a lot of matchups, but I think if the opponent has an OTK deck, and one that doesn't need you to have exactly 30 health, it doesn't mind if you get more health, it can just deal enough damage to screw you over anyway. This could be kind of nasty, because essentially this downside won't matter to them if they can get an infinite amount of damage with their OTK, and they could just keep picking this one. And then finally, there's Hot Single. So as funny as this one is probably the main reason I would say that I feel like this might be held back a bit. Essentially what this does is it summons a Miss Papyrus for the opponent, and wait, I actually didn't read the second part before. If you can't turn around and run a monster into Miss Papyrus. Oh, okay, right. I think when I first read this I just went straight to seeing what Miss Papyrus was and didn't read the rest. Anyway, Miss Papyrus is a 0 cost 1/6 with Disarmed, which means it can't attack, and at the start of every turn it dies to give all monsters in your hand and board -2/-2. Now, I know you might be like, wait, that sounds really good, but you might see it's a minimum 1/1 in hand. Oh wait, it's only in hand. Okay, never mind. Okay, right, no, this might be really good. Okay, you know what, I'm changing my opinion, yeah. This is probably still a really good card. I thought, okay, I misread this the first time, and I thought that it was a minimum 1/1 no matter where it was, like on the board as well. I thought that would mean that essentially as long as the opponent had effective abilities on their monsters, they would just not really care and always pick Hot Single, because it's probably the least detrimental downside in almost every situation. But considering it can wipe their board, yeah, actually, yeah, okay, so it does look like Spamton NEO might be quite powerful then. Then that means that all of these downsides are pretty good. So I don't usually do this, but I felt the need to add this little bit in post just because I feel like in this moment I got a bit carried away, trying not to ramble on for this card too long, and so I didn't explain how good I actually think it is very well. Especially because I just noticed on the spot the misconception with how the Miss Papyrus card worked. So essentially, I think this card is definitely going to be good, but I think it is safe from becoming a card that overruns the meta. I don't think it could get that strong. Initially, I was kind of going a little bit all over the place with this thing. Obviously, it's a lot of effects, so it's hard to predict the quality of. And I think I just went straight to just trying to think of what could counter this. And because I could think of a lot, I was thinking it might not be as good as it initially seems. But overall, I would say this card does seem like probably a very strong option. I was thinking it might get beaten out by other determination cards, considering you can only run one determination card, and we already have some absolutely S-tier determination cards that are really hard to replace. I think, though, that Spamton NEO is going to be a worthwhile card to run, even in ranked, a lot of ranks. I would guess probably a tier 2 kind of card. If it was going to go into a deck, I think it would either be defining for a tier 2 deck or just slotted into a tier 1 deck. And the big reason I say that is the fact that he costs 10. If you didn't know, 10 is the maximum amount of gold you can make every turn in Undercards. You can still hold more than 10 gold, but you can only earn 10 a turn and not any more than that unless you're using other effects outside of just normal turn generation, like gold. This means the difference between a card costing 11 and a card costing 10 is actually quite significant. As soon as a card hits 10, it becomes a lot more affordable to play and a lot less awkward to get down at the right time. Obviously 10 is still expensive, but it's a lot more manageable than a lot of the other prices of cards in the game that become when you get into the legendaries and the determination cards. In hindsight, even though there are ways to counter most of these effects, I do think that overall, in the average game, these effects are going to be very powerful, especially considering they are kind of every turn effects. And I think the biggest thing is that I was so used to big, complicated determination or legendary cards like this being big build-arounds that need lots of synergy or lots of money to work, that I was kind of thinking of Spamton NEO as that kind of card subconsciously without even really thinking about it. But taking into account it does only cost 10, and it has no outside requirements really in terms of deck building, aside from the fact simply that it is a determination card and you can only have one. Spamton NEO could be very easy to play even very early into the game. For that reason, I actually do have a lot of faith he will be a good card, and I think the fact that he's countered by so much only means that he could never dominate the meta, because if he ever did, then you could start running decks that don't care about certain downsides of certain deals so that they can abuse that fact. I think how counterable the card is only really affects its ability to ever dominate the meta. Considering you would have to really go out of your way to counter this card for most things, there are definitely some decks that might genuinely just want to have self-healing or stuff like that anyway, just as part of their deck that just so happens to counter Spamton well. But most of these kind of decks are something you would probably make intentionally to screw over Spamton NEO. So again, as I say, I think that Spamton NEO is going to be a relatively common card we see that is actually going to be quite good. It's just that he probably wouldn't ever be able to rise to like a truly oppressive card, which is definitely not a downside. That's good design. So yeah, those are the new cards. I know there's one other one here, we'll get to that. So, balancing. This is actually quite interesting this time around. First two balance changes aren't that significant. Tiny Bookshelf went from 6 health to 7 health. If you don't remember what Tiny Bookshelf is, it's a 4-cost 3/6 that if you have played spent any money on spells the turn before, gets taunt. Honestly, I'm fine with this buff, but I'm a little bit confused by it. I feel like what Tiny Bookshelf needs is more benefit for the effect, not more stats as a baseline, because I think all this is going to do is it's going to make people run Tiny Bookshelf regardless of whether they want the actual, effect trigger or not, because a 4/3/7 is obviously just really good stats on its own. You just run that, you don't care about the taunt. Maybe you'll get it sometimes, but yeah, that's basically how I see it. I mean, I'm not going to complain too much about it. I do like the idea of making it a more useful card, and it does seem like this will make it good. But again, I feel like if the idea is that they want to push this spend gold on spells last turn archetype, I think they're not pushing it very well by doing this. I think all they're doing is making Tiny Bookshelf less bad to use outside of that archetype and more just a good card in its own right without any of its effects being used. Jar of Worms also got buffed from 1 attack to 2. But this is where we celebrate. I actually thought it might never happen. Gemstones finally got completely reworked. Now, I maybe shouldn't celebrate too early, because I haven't played yet. I don't know if the Gemstones are still overpowered in this new form. However, I will say, I'm optimistic that they're balanced now by the sounds of this. I was a little bit wary at first when I saw that, in my last video I mentioned I couldn't figure out what they changed with Pickaxe. That's because they wrote out the whole effect out again, so I assumed it was like a small wording change, but what I had changed is that it lost transparency, which I was actually very happy to hear, because that was a change I suggested. And the response I got at first when I suggested that to one of the developers was, well, then it would die every single time the turn you played it, and I said, it's a 2-cost, and you can give it haste the moment you play it, and it gives you a massive reward. I think it's fair that it's got a decent chance of being killed the turn you play it, if it's going to be that cheap and give that much a reward. I was glad that went through last update. I just didn't realise, because of course it was quite hard to tell that's what had been changed reading the whole effect, and someone in the comments pointed that out. Now, I was a little bit worried at first when I saw Pickaxe getting buffed and being given transparency back, and getting a health buff as well, and I was about to cry until I saw this. Oh. Yeah, I didn't expect this, but I did suggest this as a potential change, but it wasn't really my main suggestion. It was just one I was throwing out there, and I wasn't sure if I'd actually go with it. But Gemstone's dealing 1 damage. I'm fine with this. I think this should be okay. This seems way more reasonable for a 2-drop. Having transparency and 4 health, I expect Pickaxe is still going to be a more than viable card. I think it's going to be pretty good still. But I think it's going to be way less good as an aggressive/burn card, and way more good as a control sort of card. Or, not even that it has to be in a control deck, but just general early game board control. It might still be used in aggressive decks, but I don't think it will be the driving card behind the aggression that's going to end the game if it is. I think it will just be a support card to get control of the board early, so that you're in a good spot when you need to play the cards that come after it, which might be your actual win conditions in an aggro deck. But, yeah, Gemstones are dealing 1 damage now, and since you can only get 1 of these per turn, because obviously this can only attack once per turn, I'm actually fine with this being a 2/1 forward transparency, I think. I say I think just because that is extremely survivable. These things are going to be extremely hard to kill. They are borderline impossible to kill, in fact, honestly, at this point, considering they only cost 2, they have 4 health. You can't even strafe them to kill them with, like, Justice, and you can't use Transparency, you can't target it because of Transparency. Like, that could make it horrible, but, again, I do have to keep in mind this card only has 1 attack, and it's only getting a 1 damage spell every time it attacks. So, I mean, it's kind of like, you can kind of think of it like a 2/2/4, but you have to pay 1 gold to attack with it every single time. And in fact, when I say it like that, it sounds like a terrible card. It is going to be better than that, because every time you pay that 1 gold, it counts as a spell, which obviously has synergies, and that second point of damage can be targeted wherever you want, whereas the first point, obviously, you have to take into consideration how much damage the Pickaxe is going to take back. So it is better than a 2-cost 2/4 that has to pay 1 gold to attack every time. But I think that's why it should hopefully be balanced, is because of the fact that you can make that comparison. It's quite close to what the card should be. And again, of course, a 2-cost 2/4 that has to pay 1 gold to attack doesn't sound very good. Stalagmite completely changed, gone from a 1-cost to a 4-cost. That's now a 3/3 instead of a 1/2. And now enemy monsters take +2 damage from gemstones. That might sound scary, but remember it's only monsters, so you can't use this to get stupid face damage kills. This is purely for board control. And it has magic and dust, add a gemstone to your hand. So 4-cost 3/3, get 2 gemstones. As long as it's alive, enemy monsters take +2 damage from gemstones. Probably not going to stay alive for long, considering it only has 3 health, costs 4. And this effect is relatively threatening, as long as your opponent actually cares about their board. Probably not going to be that much of a powerful effect, unless you can literally play this and like play multiple gemstones on the same turn as this. But that's not too out there, considering it literally gives you gemstones, and it does only cost 4. Pink crystals change again. Their cost has gone up to 4, their attack has gone up to 3, so they're now a 4-cost 3/4. And now, whenever you cast a gemstone, it gives the monster in front of it -1/-1, and when played, it gives you 1 gemstone. It can't generate multiple gemstones. Bag of Goodies is now a 3/2/4 instead of a 3/3/2, and it now makes it so whenever you cast a gemstone, you heal 2 health to you and add a shield to your hand. And it, of course, adds a gemstone to your hand when you play it. This one looks really powerful as a control option. Shields are really good value, just because, again, they're another card in your deck. They're going to give you another card in its place, so you're not wasting cards by playing it. And they're playing 1 to give a monster +1/+1 is generally very worth it in this game. Buffs are very powerful in this game, just in general. Magic Crystal completely got changed. It's now an 8-cost 5/5 instead of a 19-cost 6/6, because it used to have a cost reduction ability. And now, when you play it, you cast 4 gemstones on random alive enemy monsters, and if you spent gold on spells last turn, it adds Crystal Downpour to your hand, the new card that we didn't look at yet, which is a 4-cost token spell which adds 4 gemstones to your hand with -1 cost, which of course makes them free. So essentially it's just 4 to deal 4 damage, but you can choose where each point of the 4 damage goes. Waterfall Sign has been completely reworked. This is a little bit weird because Waterfall Sign wasn't a crystals card before. It never was, really, but it makes a little bit more sense when you realise that Waterfall Sign, although it had its uses, was mostly kind of replaced by Birdly. They both discounted spells and they were both pretty cheap, and Birdly just had more impressive stats and did it continuously, whereas Waterfall Sign only did it once. So unless you needed that nice low 2 cost on it, it was kind of redundant to use Waterfall Sign unless you really needed more spell cost reduction and you were already running 3 Birdlies. So now I think about it, it does make a lot of sense that Waterfall Sign should synergize with Gemstones. It kind of already fits in this package. It kind of could use a rework to be more useful. So now it's a 5-cost 4/5, which whenever you cast a Gemstone not generated by it, it adds another 1 to your hand. And when it dies, it adds 2 to your hand. Now I'll say this. If gemstones are broken this update, I think it will be because of Waterfall Sign. Just because of the fact that essentially it doubles all of your gemstones. Now, this actually scared me so much that before I recorded this video, for a moment I was considering I should just say that this is, like, overpowered, honestly. Like, I want to believe that gemstones are going to be balanced this update, especially because I like the fact that they're finally, like, listening and finally making it not so overpowered, but at the same time, this really could be broken still. What changed my mind on this is I realised, okay, it's scary because each one of them can deal 1 damage, but you can get so many of them that it doesn't matter that it only deals 1. And that, like, because it does cost 1 instead of 2 now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're spending more gold to deal the same amount of damage. You are still dealing a hell of a lot of damage for basically the same cost. The only difference is you're not getting board control at the same time now because you're only hitting 1 target instead of 2. But still, like, in theory, that's still stupid powerful for killing people. But then I realised something about this was, like, nagging me though. Like, I feel like I'm forgetting something about how this is going to matter with hitting loads of targets at once and all that. And I realised what it was. And I was like, oh yeah, I always talk about how hard it is to make sure that your hand isn't full or empty in this game, but usually full, considering you only have 7 slots for cards. Yes, you can generate like 12 like gemstones with Waterfall sign, but where are you going to store them all? You've already got to be having at least like 3 or 4 cards in your hand from your actual deck, and then you've got to make sure you play every gemstone you get in your hand before it gets filled up, but then as you play the gemstones, only more are getting added to your hand. I feel like you're going to struggle to fit all the gemstones this could potentially generate into your hand, and that is going to make it so that this doesn't break the game, hopefully. But again, if there's a deck out there that really finds a way to constantly keep an empty hand while still running a fully viable gemstone strategies, then I wouldn't be surprised if Waterfall Sign is the card that cracks the game wide open this update. Task Manager received an update. It now deals 1 damage to an enemy monster for each card placed with the base cost of 1 or more. I can't remember if in its previous iteration it only counted monsters and not spells, but either way, the main change here is that it can no longer hit face by dealing excess damage to the opponent themselves, which, I mean, I'm a little bit surprised to see this change, considering that, as far as I'm aware, there weren't really any prevalent Task Manager OTKs unless they came about late into last month's meta when I was not playing the game, but I'm not complaining because again I really don't want to deal with Task Manager OTKs, so sure. Cracked Geode also got a rework. They now add gemstones to whenever you cast a gemstone, deal 1 damage to all enemy monsters, and shock add a gemstone to your hand. That's another thing I should mention. Another way that reducing the cost of gemstones to 1 and reducing the damage to 1 is going to nerf them is now they have no synergy with shock, which could actually be quite significant considering gemstones were obviously perfect for setting off shocks before. Pickaxe won't be able to set off its own shock with its own gemstones and stuff like that. So yeah, that could change things a little bit. Makes sense that Cracked Geode was made into a gemstone card. I mean, it's a Cracked Geode. It's kind of surprising it wasn't a gemstone card. I'm pretty sure, if I remember right, this was the card that used to be, if you spent gold on spells last turn, it lets you discover another spell, like a rare spell, if I remember right. Struggling to remember, actually, but I think that was it. Flowey also got reworked, going from an epic to a legendary, which makes sense. I'm kind of surprised it took this long, to be honest. They now cost 4, and they are a 4/4. Sorry, a 4/5. Wait, no, sorry, a 4/4. I was right the first time. Instead of a 2/5. And they now have haste and dust. Return to your hand with -1/-1/-1 base stats. At 1 base attack, turn into Demon Flowey. So obviously that means this will be a 4/4 with haste, which dies, becomes a 3/2 with haste, which dies, becomes a 2/2 with haste, and then becomes a 1/1/1, but you don't actually get to play it before it turns into Demon Flowey, who has also been reworked into a 3-cost 6/6. Sorry, not the 3-cost. I was gonna say 3-cost 2/5. I'm getting dyslexia looking at this, honestly. Instead of a 6-cost 6/6, that now is essentially the old Flowey. It's a 3/2/5 with haste, and when it dies, it adds a silenced version of itself to your deck with +3/+3/+3, meaning it will cost 6 and be a 5/8 instead. Although, does the new version have haste? Because if I remember right, when Flowey shuffled himself back into your deck before this change, he got haste, even though he was silenced himself. Like, they silenced himself and then he gave him haste, so he still had haste, even though he was silenced. It looks like this won't do that, which is a little bit strange. But, either way, is this going to be good? Hard to say. You see, I would have said no, because I'm looking at this reward and I'm like, this doesn't even seem that good. Like, it doesn't seem like a great reward. But then, what could be really good about it is not actually the reward, but just the base card. I mean, I mentioned before, like a 4/4/3 haste. It's not a card you would actually put into your deck willingly. It's not that good. but it's not exactly a card you're sad to see like randomly added to your hand. A 4/4/3 haste is like decent. It's like 4 damage, and sometimes you get to keep like some attack on the board if you manage to attack into something with low enough attack. So a 4/4/3 haste I think is kind of okay. A 4/4/4 haste is obviously a little bit better than that, but it's also a 4/4/4 haste that will add more copies of itself that get smaller as you do it. And I think a 3/3/3 haste is also completely fine. A 2/2/2 haste is probably a little bit weak, but all of those are kind of fine cards, and the fact that they all are fit into this same card could be useful, just for pure board control, not really anything else. And also, I think this is going to make Flowey one of the... Okay, they cost 4. One of the very few cheap legendaries in the game. We don't have much in the way of cheap legendaries. We have Sandsdog is the cheapest, and we have Mio-Mio-san and Killer Cook, if I can remember. I think those are the only legendaries that cost less than 5, so Flowey can now be another cheaper legendary. So yeah, we might still see some use out of Flowey despite the downsides here, despite the slightly underwhelming reward for going the full distance. Just because, again, that starting stat line and the first few rewards you get just from killing him off and replaying him might actually be well worth it. The only thing I'm thinking is, usually I like to play these small haste monsters just to clear some board space while also clearing a spot in my hand. And with Flowey, of course, I wouldn't actually be clearing a spot in my hand because, you know, it would go back into my hand. But sometimes clearing a board space can open up opportunities for something in my hand to become more useful, so I might have to play Flowey with something else to fulfill that role. But still, it seems like it's decent. Again, I don't have much to say about it. I think a lot of legendaries end up like this. They kind of just decent. Like, you can run them. They won't hurt your deck. They'll probably improve it very slightly, but they're not that great either. Anyway, Snoelle got a rework, but I gotta be completely honest, guys, I can't figure out what's different. Effect update, haste, magic, paralyze a monster, delay if it's dead. Oh wait, never mind. Never mind. I think that's really fun. I reread this like 4 or 5 times before I start recording, and I think I've just realised what the difference is. So I'm pretty sure this used to say paralyze an enemy monster. So I think what's changed is that Snoelle can now target your own monsters if you want to kill off your own monsters to activate Snowgrave, which is an interesting thought. I don't think this is going to change much, but we might see later down the line like self-sacrifice decks that actually run Snoelle, because that's extra self-sacrifice synergy. Be kind of interesting. Anyway, in terms of spells, there are a couple balance changes. Obviously, gemstones we already know. Frige, I don't remember exactly, but I think the different thing here is I think Frige used to draw from the bottom of your deck, and now it just draws from a random. It just draws a card. It doesn't draw from the bottom. Contamination costs 1 more. I don't know. Again, I didn't play really in the mid-season last month meta, so I don't know if it was overpowered, but obviously that would imply it is. I could see it. I just don't see how you got so much KR. I'm kind of surprised about that, but if you could get a lot of KR on people with not much difficulty, of course it is an extremely powerful effect. Honestly, it kind of makes sense. Contamination is one of those cards where, like, I never saw it. I've never really seen it being played, but if you ever had a deck where you could get KR onto things easily enough and often enough that you would want to play it, then already that would instantly, like, probably catapult it to being one of the strongest cards that Perseverance would have. Because if you, the moment you can get KR consistently enough, 7 becomes an extremely cheap cost for a full board clear. So yeah. Good Food also sadly got nerfed. I'm kind of surprised they put this in yellow. I guess it's because it's an effect update, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm pretty sure there is literally no benefit to this. It's just a full-on downside. Good Food now only can heal you once per turn. Yikes. Okay, so this makes sense. Good Food is a very good artifact in my opinion, and the only reason we haven't seen that much of it recently is just because, again, the meta, I feel like, isn't a meta where Good Food would have thrived. Well, I say that, Again, I didn't play very much of like the last half of last month's meta, but at least November and early December, it just felt like good food wasn't that useful in a lot of decks to me, because the decks either dealt damage in one big burst that basically made healing useless, because by the time you could heal it was too late, or it would be a deck that plays at such a fast pace that you wouldn't get to your food that was shuffled into your deck in time, and you'd rather have more instant healing like from Prosperity, even if the healing is less. But that being said, I see how I'm not that surprised that good food has been nerfed, just because when it is useful, good food does provide a crazy amount of healing. It is one of the greatest, like, I think out of the artifacts in the game before this update, it was probably the artifact with the biggest possible reward if you really lent into it. If you really put enough spells in your deck to activate it a lot of times, and you had a deck in a meta where you could reliably get into the relatively late game so that you could start drawing your food before you died, then yeah, good food would give you tons and tons of healing for very little downside, and it was well worthwhile. And I absolutely love turning around games where, like, it's getting a bit sketchy. I've been barely staying alive for like the whole game, and then I'm dropping down to like 4 health, and then I just start getting to the bottom of my deck and I've hardly drawn any food the whole game. And because that means that like 2/3 of my deck is food now, it's just like draws a card, heals, draws a card, heals, draws a card, heals. Oh, look at that, I'm back up to 20 health now. But again, obviously I can understand how that could be overpowered and it could be annoying. So I'm not so surprised it got nerfed. I'm more surprised this is how they went about it. I feel like, I'll be honest, even though I could agree that good food might have needed a nerf, this seems really, really bad. Like, the main problem with it is that good food is not a card that's going to heal you periodically over time for the whole game. That's what it sounds like in theory, but it's never going to pan out like that realistically. It's going to heal you a whole bunch only in the late game, because the later into the game you get, on average, the more of your the percentage of your deck will just become more and more food. At the start of the game, even when you shuffle quite a few in there, because you have 30 cards in your deck, well, 25 cards in your deck, and because you probably only shuffled 4 or 5 of them in there, it's only going to make us up a small percentage of your deck. And then it's going to make up about half your deck by the end of the game, which means it's just going to be quite common that when you run good food, you might only draw 1 food in like the first 10-15 turns of the game, and then in the last few turns you might be drawing 4 every turn. And that's just how good food works. So making it so it can only heal once per turn actually massively shoots this card in the foot. Now you've really got to rely on good luck to only get 1 of these per turn, and I don't think it's going to be that uncommon that you're just going to get unlucky and you're just going to draw like 6 of these in a row and oops, you wasted half the food in your deck. It's like, I don't know. I really don't like this change, to be honest. I might even have go as far as to say I prefer it to literally just to heal 1 health, but be the same as before. Maybe that'd be a little bit too little, but I don't know. It feels like you can make good food stack enough if you like lean into it, that even just making it 1 health, it'd still be worthwhile. Anyway, there's one other effect update. You can see Outbreak, which at the start of every turn, wait, I'm not going to read it all out. Basically, it's just been changed so that you can't have more than 2 soul cages on the board at once. I'm fine with this. I'm actually, I was a little bit worried when I saw Outbreak getting nerfed here, because I'm like, oh, was I right about last update? Could Kris break the game, and they're going to nuke him now? Are they going to make him useless now? Oh no, I should have seen this coming. But no, this is a very reasonable nerf. I don't know how having more than 2 soul cages was overpowered, but I'm not going to complain because I don't plan to let more than 2 soul cages be on the board a lot of the time. I'm only guessing it was kind of just a situation of a deck that was so efficient at clearing the board that one thing that sometimes people try and do to stop themselves from dying to soul cage is they try to fill their entire board with just monsters in every slot, so that when it tries to summon a soul cage, there's no space for it. I can only imagine there's a deck that baited people into trying to do that and then had such efficient like removal that it removed everything they played all the time and just ignored the soul cages because they didn't have a high enough attack to be a threat, and just let them sit there and until they built up and covered their whole board and then just had enough damage to kill them all at once. That's my best guess, but I don't know. Either way, as I say, I'm fine with this nerf because I could see how it might be in theory overpowered, and I don't think it will actually change people playing the card normally. I think this will only affect decks that were trying to abuse the card in strange ways. So if you were just playing this card normally, then I don't think that this nerf will really change anything. Anyway, those are the changes for Undercards. I'll hopefully try to get some more videos out on this game in this month. As I say, I really couldn't get into it last month. I didn't play it for like a couple of weeks, 2.5 abouts. So that's why I wasn't making videos on it. I almost changed my mind at the last minute and thought, oh, you know what? Before we get to the end of the month, I haven't done my season quests. What if I just made a video trying to rush every season quest and all that? But by that time, I was just like, I've not got a lot of energy in me right now. I don't think I could try and rush out a video like that. But as I say, I'm going to probably try and participate more in the meta this month. See how things are panning out. I'm very interested to see if I can make Royal Papyrus better than it appears. So I'll look into if there's anything that would be especially powerful given taunt with this. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.